Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me again for our discussion on sound walls. Now, I know that there's probably going to be a lot of questions all the way through this presentation. Sound walls can be confusing, and I've already gotten several questions in advance asking me about things that we're going to talk about. But so I'm going to try to go back and forth and look at, I'm going to pull up the questions now so I can make sure that they're up on my screen. And then I'm going to go through the presentation. I'm going to give you some examples and we'll make room for questions because sound walls are a little bit confusing to people. And it's funny because people are like, oh, they're new. No, they're not new. They've been around for a long time. It's just there's a lot of misinterpretation about what sound walls are. And, or I guess it's not misinterpretation. I guess if you want to call whatever you're doing or whatever someone's doing a sound wall, I guess they have that prerogative. So I've been using them for close to 25 years, really long time. And I never called it a sound wall, but then that kind of term caught on, and so now I'm calling it a sound wall. So it's just like almost anything else. As education evolves, terminology evolves, and that's what happens. So let's switch to the presentation, and we can get started. Alrighty, so what we are going to be talking about are sound walls and how to use them effectively. And what really matters is not that your sounds are posted, because people will say that, like they'll say, you know, like I have a curriculum, and they'll say, I use your curriculum, you know, and I walk into the room and I'll see, you know, all of my sound walls up and all, you know, our kind of, you know, posters that go along with our curriculum. But I realized they're not actually using the curriculum. They're just posting it up on the wall. And so I kind of liken that to the fact that, you know, I wear yoga pants. It doesn't mean that I've ever once stepped into a yoga class. So to me, it's way more important that you use it well than you just display it. Okay. So I'm going to go through why that effectiveness is so important. And I think, you know, most teachers will kind of understand that. We have a lot of kids who kind of, they regurgitate, they can spit things back and forth at you, but they can't generalize it. They don't understand it at a depth of knowledge that we really need them to take it to that next level. And I think sound walls help to transition kids from that, I get it, I've learned it, I've heard it, I can spit it back at you, to how do I apply it? How do I use it every day? How do I use it without asking my teacher how to spell something, or my friends? How do I, and sound walls facilitate that process. So they're going to help the kids get to where they need to be when it comes to spelling and attaching it to phonics. So let's begin. First, if you don't know who I am, my name is Jennifer Hasser. I run Syllables Learning Centers and Kendore Learning. We are Orton, Gillingham accredited and IMSLEC accredited teacher trainers, and we provide materials and work with kids of all ages and train teachers of all ages and sell our fun stuff, our games and activities. So if you've never heard of us, you should check out our website. It's kind of cool. We do some good things around here. We also have a couple things coming up that I just want to talk to you about. So our webinars, we have a lot more that aren't even on here yet. We have some guest speakers, like we had William Van Cleve on Monday, and we have additional speakers coming up in the next month and a half. So you should check that out. We also are going to do another webinar on April 30th. It's multisensory spelling rules, 1 through 4, and we're kind of breaking it up into parts, because I call it a clock face, which is based on 12 spelling rules, and we're going to break it up into 3 actual webinars, and then the clicks, which are like our professional learning communities, but it's a Kendore Learning community, so it's called a click, but it's a click that anyone can join. So feel free to join us for that. And I'll be giving the materials that I usually do during a training, I'll be giving them to the people in the clicks. And we're only charging $10 for it because we're doing a fundraiser for our foundation. And our foundation will provide tutoring for kids who cannot afford it nor aren't being served right now by their schools. So we have a very long waiting list, always do, because we've been doing this program for 20 years. And it's based on financial need. So if you know anybody that needs services, that would be, you can refer them to us. You can also go to join our click, and your $10, you'll get something cool out of it, and you'll also be donating to help kids in need. So we would appreciate that very much. All right. Next, what is a traditional word wall? In case you've never seen one, but I'm sure you have. So a traditional word wall basically contains a list of words that teachers think that kids should know. It will vary from classroom to classroom. A lot of times it has those fry and dolch words on it, all those real high frequency words, aka sight words / high frequency words / dolch / fry, whatever you want to call them. You typically will see those on there, and then you'll see like just random words that have to do with math or maybe science or social studies that the teacher wants to incorporate and put them up on that word wall. Word walls are usually listed alphabetically, and so kids would have to, if they wanted to know how to spell one of those words, that they would have to look up on that wall, find it alphabetically, and then figure out how to spell it, which, as we know, dictionaries don't really help you with spelling unless you're pretty close, right? Because we need to know about, there's alternate spellings for different sounds and what sound starts with. A dictionary traditionally should be used for meaning. So if you don't know the meaning of a word, you would look it up in the dictionary, you would figure out what it means, and then you would continue reading whatever you were reading. And it can help you with spelling, but only within a certain window, because there's lots of variability there. So it's believed that this traditional word wall will help kids with spelling and vocabulary. I'm not actually sure how that would help them with vocabulary, unless it's a word they already know. And oh my goodness, unless it is a word that they already know, having it up on the wall isn't really going to help. So if they need to spell that word, they would have to know what word they wanted to use. They'd have to know what it meant, and then they'd have to look on the wall to be able to find it. It's a pretty labor-intensive process to try to figure that out. But if a kid wants to spell something, they usually have it in their head what they want to spell. They don't look to the wall to think of, oh, I'll spell something containing a sentence with that word in it, because it's up there on that wall, right? And then the walls are often put up in a way that is designed to show you the shape of that word, because they, maybe 20, 30 years ago, people thought that the shape of the word was going to help you to learn how to spell that word. And so oftentimes there are boxes around them that show you the shape of the word so that it would help you retain that information. We know now that that is not the best way to learn words, and really honestly not that effective. Lots of words at the same shape. Don't know how you're going to memorize the volume of shapes and words that you would need to be able to become a proficient reader by looking at a word wall. So you can probably tell I'm not a big fan. So this is a traditional word wall. I just picked this up off the internet. It's not really even that clear of a picture, and I didn't want to cite it because I don't think it's that great, but it is on there as an example of what a good word wall would look like, and with a lot of reasons accompanying it as to what you should be, why you should display this way. But you'll notice that there are shapes around all of these words, so you would be able to figure out how to spell the word in by its shape. I'm not really sure how that would work. You see that it starts with the first letter. It doesn't necessarily start with the same sound. So you'd have to know how that sound was spelled in order to find that word on that word wall. So there's a lot of things that are kind of wrong with this traditional word wall concept. And it's a lot of space to waste in the classroom for something that really is not that beneficial. Okay, so let's move on. So why should we stop using traditional word walls? Okay, this is my number one reason. It's probably not the best reason, but it's because I said so. And if that's not good enough, I'm going to continue on. So if you have already decided that you're not going to use them anymore, then, you know, there you go. So there are also things traditionally used that are called sound spelling cards. Now, I have worked with kids where they come in and I'll say, you know, do you know how to spell the E sound? And they'll say EE, comma, EA, comma, E, comma. And what I know is that they have memorized a list of spellings because they're actually telling me the commas in between. So I know that they can memorize these, but do they know when to use these? So oftentimes you'll go into a classroom and what you'll see is this long list of different ways to spell a particular sound. And I just kind of grabbed this off the internet as well. It is vowel spellings for long E, and I guess their keyword was C, so that you knew what the long E was, and then all of these different ways to spell it. Now, the issue that I have with this is that if you wanted to spell a word, okay, so let's say you want to spell the word leap, you would look up there and you'd say, oh, L-E-E-P, or maybe L-E-P-E, or maybe L-E-P. That's not going to work, right? Because even though it says you can spell E with a single E from this list, it doesn't tell you when and where in the word you would be able to use that. Because when we put the E in between the ul and the p, it becomes eh, because it becomes a closed syllable. So that's not going to work. If they look up here and they see an I, that would be lip. When is an I going to say the E sound? And where in the word would that be? Because most typically when that I says that E sound, it is a connective holding, you know, two parts of a Latin word together. So like media, be M-E-D, which is middle, and then that suffix, which is going to make it a noun. And then that I in between is a connective holding those two pieces together, that root and that suffix. So by listing this, just listing this on the wall and saying, yo, look at the wall, or here are all the different spellings, it's not really going to help a child to figure out how to spell these words. Just put up like this, because if I continue through this list, you'll see that I've got leap, which probably if I said I was going to take a leap, that would be the one that I was going for. But on this list, you know, when would I have gotten there? Then IEP, nope. This one I love, because if I actually put those together, I typed it out. I was like, that makes no sense. And then EY, and then Y, which it would again make it a closed syllable, and it would be lip. So at least like there was an asterisk and it said often, you know, as the suffix, right? But when I look at this chart, it's really not going to really facilitate my learning all the different spellings of E, and it's probably going to intimidate me into thinking, oh my gosh, I am not going to be doing this ever again, right? So if I look at, let's say, if we're saying the sound here is E, then let's talk about me, okay? So my name is Jennifer. And even though I am still going to be the same person, there are multiple things that you could call me. And that's kind of, if you say the sound E is going to be the same sound, but there's multiple ways of representing it, it would be similar to this. So when I do my teacher trainings, I try to say, like, we don't want to teach all the E spellings all at once, because it'll be like that list we just saw, and that's overwhelming, right? So I'll say to my teacher trainees, and I'll just say, okay, let's say it's 7:20 right now, and if you need to address me, I would like you to address me as Jennifer, all right? From 7:20 to 7:25. Okay, at 7:25, if you would address me as Jennifer Jean, because that is what my mom calls me when she's really mad at me, right? Jennifer Jean, because that's my middle name. Then at 7:30, if you would call me JJ, because that's what everyone called me when I was young. I was JJ in kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. And if anybody calls me JJ, I kind of know that's when I knew them in my life. And then, you know, if we get to know each other really well by like 7:45, you can call me Jen, because a lot of my friends call me Jen, and that would be totally comfortable and fine and not a big deal. And then if you want to call me maybe at 7:50, you could call me Iffer, because there was this time when my friends wanted to call me Jen, but my mom didn't like Jen. So they would call on the phone and say, is Jen there? My mom would finish it and she would say Iffer. So she was trying to finish Jennifer, but what ended up happening is my friends started calling me Iffer. Luckily, that only lasted for my 6th grade year, and then I was transferred to another school. But thank you, Mom. And that would, you know, I only want you to call me that for like 2 minutes, because that was a terrible time in my life. And then you can call me Miss Hasser if like any students should walk in here while I'm doing this, which they won't right now because no one else is here but me. But if they were to walk in, that would be, you can call me Miss Hasser, because that would be totally polite and appropriate. And if you hear somebody calling me Mom, the only 2 people that call me Mom are my twin daughters, Catherine and Claire. So, but that is definitely another thing that I'm called. And then right about 8:05, if you would call me Your Royal Highness, because I always wanted to be called that. Now, if I laid that out for you and said, I will only answer your questions tonight if you, during those time frames, address me by those terms, then you wouldn't ask me a question, because you'd be overwhelmed. You're like, what time was it? When was I supposed to use that? Even though I clearly explained when to use it, why to use it, and that these all will refer to the same person, me, it's the same thing as if we were teaching that E sound and then giving them all the different ways to spell it. It would be overwhelming, right? And that's when it's overwhelming, then the kids won't want to use it, and they won't feel like actually pairing these sounds and symbols together is that helpful. They'll resort to memorization, and that's what we're trying to get them away from, is that we're trying to give them reasons for why these spellings occur, so that they will be able to use them appropriately. So they'll be able to use them where they need to, and it'll take a huge burden off of that short-term working memory. Because if kids have to memorize every word that they want to spell, most kids aren't going to get very far, okay? So what should we do instead? We should do sound walls. So I'm going to talk about the sound walls. I'm going to show you some examples of things that I do, and then we're going to, I'm just going to show you a couple of activities on a whiteboard so that you can see how I would do it. All right, so why sound walls? The first thing is children learn sounds first. They learn sounds from as soon as they're born, right? They cry for attention. There's different types of cries. They, you know, coo back and forth with their parents. They mimic. If you see all those little cute little TikTok videos of babies saying, I love you and things like that, it's adorable. But they mimic what their parents do, and because that's what they're doing. It is developmentally appropriate for them to learn sounds, for them to learn to imitate sounds. And it doesn't matter what language. If you spoke French, they would learn French. If you spoke English, they would learn English. And so it's that opportunity to mimic you, to imitate you, to move their mouth around until what comes out of their mouth is understood by the other person. So if you've ever raised a toddler, you'll know that if you can't understand what they want, they get very, very upset. So they'll spend a lot of time and energy producing the sounds that will make you respond the way that they want. And that's kind of the way humans work, right? So they're not worried about how to spell it, but they are worried about how to say it. And they're learning how to pair their mouth movement with the things that the sounds that are coming out of their mouth. So what they're basically doing is they're learning how to operate a musical instrument, which is their voice. Because if you move your mouth around and you push air out of different, holes, like if you say, it's coming out of your nose, right? So that you are playing an instrument called English or French or Spanish or Chinese or whatever it is, whatever language you're learning, that's what you're going to manipulate those sounds. So if kids learn sounds first, and they have spent 5 years before they get to kindergarten manipulating them, learning new words, learning meanings for these things. Their brains are like supercomputers right then, at that age. So this is, they're primed to learn how to spell by pairing it with a sound, because it'll just make sense to their brain, and that's the way their brain is developing, right? Reading is a man-made skill. It's not just going to develop the way sound develops over time and speech develops over time. It is something that's man-made. So we could take these natural developmental sequences and then turn them to our advantage when we're trying to pair it with the symbols, which is phonics. So phonics is a symbol. When you teach the symbol first, okay, that's letter first. I am a proponent of sound first. So identify the sound, understand the sound, understand the sound if it has a meaning, which is morphology in that word, why it would be used in that word in that place, at the beginning of a word or at the end of a word, or, is it a submorpheme? So giving them all of that opportunity to learn that, because they already have anchored to that sound. Right? When you say this is the letter B and it says B, that's letter first, and it makes it a little bit harder for kids than it would be if you paired it with a mouth movement and telling them this is how you produce it, and these are words that have that sound in it, and then you're going to show them the symbol, and it's going to make a more logical progression for kids to anchor to those symbols, for all kids, not just dyslexic kids, but I think it's imperative for dyslexic kids to do sound first. So if a child is trying to spell a word, a sound wall is going to be a resource for them to say, okay, I know what I want to spell. Because most kids, when they want to say, like, I rode my bike, what did you do this weekend? I rode my bike. They are going to know what they want to say, right? They know what they want to write, because that's what they have kind of pulled out of their imagination or their experiences to write. Now they have to say, okay, how do I spell that word? How do I figure out what letters go with that word? And a lot of times, kids who don't know how to listen for that sound, break it down, then they can look up at their sound wall and say, okay, if this is the sound I'm looking for, what spellings do I know that I can use to spell that word? And so you'll see, like, spelling kind of spells, spelling, where people call it developmental spelling. I have a little bit of with that, but what is considered to be developmental spelling is that, the kids will use what they've learned. I don't think that's developmental. You're not growing into it, but it's what you've learned so far. So if you licked an ice cream cone, you might spell it L-I-K-T, right? Licked, because you don't know the spelling conventions of, a CK and then a past tense and all of that. So I don't consider it developmental, because you're not growing into knowing how to spell licked, but for what you know at that point in your learning, then that's the way you would spell it if you were listening for the sounds. So you would go to your sound wall and you were like, how do I spell ooh? How do I spell I? How do I spell k? How do I spell t? And then you would put that down. Now, if you had learned about the CK rule, if you had learned about past tense, that eventually would end up being on your sound wall as well as alternate spellings for those sounds. Okay, so there are only 44 sounds in our language. Depending on who you talk to, there's like 800,000 words. Some people count words as like the base units, and some count it as every word with like a suffix, and so it just depends on what word list you're looking at. But even if it were only 200,000 words, 44 sounds is still way more efficient. Okay, and then once you have those 44 sounds, there are only approximately 1,200 graphemes, which are representations of those sounds. But some of them are extremely rare, so they're not something that a kid has to worry about all the time, right? So if you're going to start doing your sound wall, you want to start with the most frequent sounds and spellings first, okay, or the most age appropriate. And so we'll kind of go through what some of those things are. Okay, so this is the Vowel Valley, right? I do sound walls for my consonants and I do them for my vowels. And I figured I would start with the vowels because this would be an easier thing to do in an hour. So the Vowel Valley is actually I teach my vowel sounds, I teach it oral, motor, kinesthetic. So I'm going to talk about your natural speech production for sounds, because if you say the Vowel Valley, it would end up being an oral motor kinesthetic activity, but it starts like this: E, I, a, ah, o, oo. Okay, so that's just going down the valley and up the other side. So if I were to talk to kids about this, I'd say, okay, I have a story that goes along with this. So our helicopter lands at the top of the valley, because we just had some other stuff happen when we were talking about our consonants. So we decided to take off on an adventure with our friends, and we go to the Vowel Valley, and our helicopter lands, and we decide to take a picture. And what do you say when you get your picture taken? Cheese. Why don't you say potato? Because it doesn't make you smile, right? So kids learn that E sound, E, and I would say, can you tell me some words that have the E sound in it? And I would say, you know, listen for them to tell me some, and some might be, you know, they might say happy, excellent, I hear the E sound. Where do you hear it? I hear it at the end, happy, right? Eagle, easy, sheep. All of those words have the E sound in them. And I am not going to say anything negative about, you know, the words they chose, or as long as there's E sound. If they say egg, I would say, do you hear the E sound? Because I don't. And you could tell like that they know how to spell egg, and when I said the sound E, they're thinking, oh, the letter E, which is not the same thing as the sound. So once we've, you know, I'd be doing a bunch of phonological awareness activities, so I'm just kind of shortening this. So if I said, hey, those are all words with the E sound, and you guys did a great job, but we need to talk about spellings as well. So the very first spelling of E that we're going to talk about today is EE. And so I am teaching in the Vowel team EE, and when you see those two E's together, they make one sound, and it's E. So that is the first spelling that we're learning. If a student says to me, well, what about happy? It's Y. I'm like, you're correct, and we're going to get to that. All right. What about EA? You're correct. We're going to get to that. You know, what about me? It has one E in it. I'm like, absolutely. We're going to get to that. But right now we're working on this one. So I don't deny that those other things exist. I just say, this is what we're going to work on right now. And I think it's the same thing. Sometimes people feel like they have to introduce all of those spellings at once, because then it wouldn't be complete. But I think it's okay. So you don't have to say EE is the only spelling for E. And it's okay to say you're going to get to that. So if you were teaching social studies and you were studying North America, and say, we're going to study North America. And if a kid says, well, what about Asia? Oh, we'll get to that. What about Australia? Oh, we'll get to that. What about South America? We'll get to that. It's totally acceptable to do that, to say, okay, this is the one we're working on now. And none of those things are wrong, but we're going to work our way through this. Okay, so E would be my first one. And then since I'm using oral motor kinesthetic, and I would move my jaw down, it would go from E to I. And I would do the same things, you know, words with I, lots of phonological awareness activities. Once we really understood the I, then I'm going to show them that letter, right? So that letter is the letter I, right? That is the name of that letter. What sound are we learning for that letter? We are learning I right now. And that's because we're using, you know, going through the vowel circle, which is linguistics, and we're going through in that kind of order. So as we go down, I would do the same thing. I would go into our next sound is going to be eh, and then we'd go to ah, and then we go to and then we're down the bottom of the valley, because we have e, I, right? And our jaws is getting lower and lower every time. And they make us smile, which is why we have our little smiley guy over here, right? When we get to the bottom, our mouth is open, because when you go to the dentist doesn't say open up and say I, because your jaw is going to be closed. They say open up and say ah, right? Ah, because we want your mouth all the way open. And so that's where we get to our open sounds, and we have ah. So now there are three across the bottom down here. Ah, ah, ah. These three are actually three different sounds. Now, I live in Georgia. They're pretty much the same sound here. So I am okay with a lot of times letting kids say ah, 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 and they sound exactly the same. because we have the Georgia Bulldogs, right? Dogs, depends on how far outside of Atlanta you get. And so I teach them that we have these different, they sound similar, but these three down here are going to come in different positions in words. They have different frequency. And I'll say the O, if you hear the O sound, most likely it's going to be an O, because the majority of the time it's going to be an O. If I hear O, then it's most likely an O. So dog, log, right? If it's multisyllabic, it's most likely going to be an O. Now, AU comes at the beginning or middle of words, but it is a lot less frequent, a lot less frequent. But you want kids to know these combinations exist, and you want to give them options. Now, if I have the AW and that says aw, if they hear the sound aw and it's at the end of a word, then it would be like paw, saw. Most likely it's going to be that AW at the end. Now you notice I'm saying a lot of things like most likely and frequently and most frequently. And a lot of people tell me that kids cannot understand that. I completely disagree. Every kid that I know in kindergarten understands this from the standpoint of, you know, who do I have a better chance of getting root beer for breakfast from? My grandma or my mom? Probably grandma, right? Am I going to get in more trouble if I'm bad in the principals in the class, or it's just the teacher? Like, kids know odds. They know, oh, am I going to, is it, you know, am I more likely to be hurt if I jump from the 3rd stair, you know, or the 12th stair? Even little kids are like, I don't think that's a good idea, right? That's odds. They know about frequency. They know about choices, and they make choices all the time based on, it's more likely that I'll get a present if I'm good. It's less likely if I'm bad. And that's all about odds. And a lot of times people worry about phonics that it has to be, you know, one-to-one correspondence, and we don't have that. But if we can narrow down the odds, then that's a really good thing for kids, because we're giving them some options. Okay, so getting some questions here, and there's like English language learners. This is great for English language learners, because we're actually teaching them how to produce the sound, and then we're pairing them the sound with that symbol. I mean, it's really, really good for English language learners. It's really, really good for kids who have a hard time distinguishing the difference between sounds, because if you're giving them the ability to feel it in their mouth, then they're way more likely to anchor to it. Because if you teach kids how to produce even just like a B and a D, like a B, D, then what's going to happen is kids don't say, you know, my mom and Bab, right? They know they're saying dad. They just have a hard time remembering which one is which, right? Because they look similar. But if you can anchor that D, D to the mouth movement and the B to the mouth movement, then they would be able to, it would help them to distinguish the difference between that B and D so much easier. Okay, so, and a lot of our spelling rules go back to sounds. They go back to that relationship between the sounds, so that when we decided to, when I say we, you know, historically, when humans decided to write things down, they had to come up with a code that represented the sounds. It wasn't like they were walking around and found the letter B laying down and said, oh, I will call this B, right? It was the opposite. They said, okay, we have to figure out how to spell all of these. And the reason we have vowels is for ease of speech production. The reason we have a lot of our spelling rules are for ease of speech production. And that means these sounds are very similar in where they're formed in our mouth, right? That's why we can't have, you know, a bunch of consonants. Nobody names their kid. This would be really hard to say and really weird. Okay. Okay, let's see. Do I display a visual cue for what the mouth looks like for each sound? I know a lot of people do. I don't necessarily do it because we practice it like every single day, and the kids do it and they feel it. I'll have them look in mirrors and watch the way they're producing the sound in their mouth. But I'm not against mouth pictures. Most of them I see kind of look gross. but that's just me. Isn't E a more challenging sound to start with? Why not teach long E as an open syllable? Aha, that is a good question. And this is why. If I use the E as an open syllable, then my next one, if I go in this order, is going to be I and then eh. And I can tell you this, I, eh are confused. They are so hard to hear the difference between, and so many kids have that I, eh confusion. And I live in Georgia, and if you ask for a pen, you know, is it a pin? Is it a pen? I don't know. And if I had the spelling of a single E and open syllable as my first one, then I would not use that. And the other reason is because if you are, you know, going to teach open syllables, I prefer to teach them all together. So I would be teaching E, I, you know, like if I was going down this, you know, I would teach I as open, E as open, A as open, U as open, O as open, all together. And I really like having E as the first spelling. And the reason I like it is because it's easy for kids to produce out of their mouth. It's also really easy for them to blend. And all of the other short vowels are harder for kids to blend. So it's a great one. I like it. And then I don't have to confuse that single E open syllable spelling with the I sound that I do next. Okay. And so someone's like, is the sound E? Yeah, E is the first sound, and the first letter representation is EE that I teach on this one. And so how does this order compare to teaching phonics patterns? This is from easy to complex phonics patterns is really an interpretation of people based on visual symbols. So if a kid says, hi, like, hi, how are you? If they say, wow, that's really high, they don't know that there's a difference in the way that they are spelled, right? So they just know how to say speech sounds. So if we know how to do the speech sounds, then we're going to be able to slowly give them some of the alternate spellings for those speech sounds, okay? Okay, so some of you guys are already asking me about the alternate spellings. I'm not there yet. I'm not even worried about that yet. So if I'm doing ah, and one of my littles spells laugh, L-A-F, I'm like, awesome, great job. I'm not expecting that you're going to know A-U-G-H, that the G-H says, or any of those other things. So it's about holding them accountable for what I've taught. So if they spell hat and I've taught, then I expect them to spell it correctly. But if I have not taught laugh as A-U-G-H, then I'm not going to expect that they spell it correctly, right? So I may point out that it is something that's irregularly spelled, and we talk about that. But that'll come down the road. Okay, so I'm not so worried about that. Let's see. Oh, will I be having? Yeah, already we're talking about the consonant word wall. Okay, is this progression based on research or preference? It's my preference. It's also based on research. So if you are a letter first person, a lot of people have been trained to go by letters first, and you pick all the round letters first or all the stick letters first. That's a visual introduction of sounds. And I think that the research supports the fact that, you know, reading is a phonologically based, you know, endeavor, right? So we know that phonological awareness and phonological processing are the biggest predictors of reading success or failure. So if you're going to learn a way to do it, why learn visually? I think learning, you know, based on the sound first model makes a lot more sense. There are a lot of people out there that say this. I don't know if you've ever read Speech to Print. It's a pretty popular book out there by Louisa Moats. She just released her 3rd edition. I suggest if you have not seen it, you should pick it up and read it. It's an excellent book. I think I first read it almost 20 years ago. It's been a long time. Okay. Am I teaching this from when children start at 5? Absolutely, I am. I can teach them all these sounds and then one spelling for each sound at 5. Any 5-year-old, you know, in a general ed setting that isn't, you know, severely delayed, can learn 44 things. So if they can learn 44 things, you know, why do people focus on sight word flashcards? And there's hundreds of those when you could teach 44 sounds, and then the child would be spelling phonetically, and then slowly over time they would learn all the different ways to spell. And some of those are going to have to memorize, right? That's just kind of the way life works. Is there anything that uses this progression? Yes, me and everything I do. So, would I teach anything before starting A, E, I, O, and U before starting the Vowel Valley? No. I would start exactly the way I told you. Okay, the first sound is E, then we go to E, I, and then I'll show you the rest of the progression in a moment. And that to me just kind of makes more sense. So you're like, is this your scope and sequence? Yes, this is my scope and sequence. So when, if I can give a kid something to anchor to other than just their rote memory, most kids who struggle, they have serious issues with memory. Almost every child with a learning disability has some type of memory deficit. And so if you can give them something else to anchor to, like their mouth, and you know, the thing that I know about teaching, and for as long as I've taught, I have never had one of my students ever leave their mouth at home. But they have left vowel charts. They leave the room, and if the vowel chart is on the wall is gone, their mouth is still with them, right? I mean, there have been kids where I'm like, leave your mouth at home, but do they? Nope, they bring it with them every single day. So it's really something that they can utilize as a tool for their learning forever. And have you ever seen people like on an airplane and they read and they're moving their mouth the whole time? They don't even realize that they are using that to decode, to figure it out, to pull things apart. A lot of people do it when they're spelling, when they're writing, they move their mouth and they don't even understand why they are. But your mouth will be paired to a spelling. And if that's brought into your consciousness, it's going to help facilitate better spelling skills. So to me, I think it's super valuable. Okay, let's see. How do I handle spelling with students who are getting randomized lists? Yeah, so someone's like, how do I handle it if they're getting randomized lists from the regular classroom? Well, I train regular classroom teachers. So when I train their teachers, they're not getting those lists. So, or I hope they're not. But if you are a private tutor or you're working with a kid outside of class, there's only so much you can do. My daughter is dyslexic. I was gonna say was dyslexic. She's graduating from college in a week. So, but you know, when she was young, I wouldn't make her do her spelling tests. So the list would be weird things like pyramid, Egypt, Nile River, whatever. And she was in first grade, and I'm like, this is not a spelling list. This is a history unit. And so, but she wanted to do well, so she always wanted to try to memorize it. But to me, I was like, I don't care. You know, we need to work slowly through these, you know, phonemes and then pair them with graphemes and then get you on your way so that you'll be graduating from college. I try to educate people. That's what I'm doing here. I've spent most of my life trying to educate people into easier ways to teach, you know, so that you don't have to have such a burden on memorization. And honestly, I think when teachers have a more efficient way of doing it, they're happier. And if the teacher's happier, then the kids are happier and everyone's happier and more successful. Someone just said, would you teach one sound per day? No. If I'm in kindergarten, like I would do one sound a week. If it's consonants, well, I'd have a different progression. But for vowels, you'll be learning how to blend and how to read words, and then you can start doing some, you know, sentence level stuff. And so there's a lot more to do. But that's my opinion. Is this taught before consonants? No, it's after consonants. I would teach the consonants first. Consonants are much easier than vowels. And once they're anchored to the consonants, then we would move into the vowels. Okay, so let's move on. This is what the Vowel Valley would look like if I were in a kindergarten classroom. So when you go through this, it's E, I, A, O, U. Then you go down the side, you're going to slide down, and those are your diphthongs like I, U, oi, and ow, and your mouth slides when you say those. Okay, and I have made this is our Vowel Valley bulletin board, and it has all of the sight words that have that vowel sound. So this is a sound wall. If you're in kindergarten and you need to spell good or book or saw, and these are high frequency words, right? You can look up to the vowel sound, find it, and look at that word, right? But it really shouldn't be necessary that you have it up there. But there are a lot of kids that are on a lot of different levels, so at least they'd be able to find their high frequency words by doing this in kindergarten. And so to me, this is a much better word wall than the randomized word walls that you would have based on initial letters. So these kids know that in the Vowel Valley, if they hear that E sound, where to go. If they hear the OO sound, where to go. And then from there, they can look for the word that they need to spell, right? And these are all those high frequency words. Now, when you get to criminal words, that's totally different, right? Because this is my word wall for criminal words, because the criminal words should be all the words that don't follow a rule. Now, you're going to look at some of these and you're going to say, okay, these are, some of these are phonetic. Yes, some of them are phonetic, but they're not phonetic at my point of introduction. And so if I am introducing some of these words to kindergartners, the word have, H-A-V-E, it is a phonetic word. It's totally phonetic. It's, you know, people get mad because they say it's not have. I'm like, but you know, you have live and live, and that's the same spelling. It's because words in English can't end in B. Once the kids would learn that rule, then it gets off the criminal word wall. It is no longer in timeout. It is learned the error of its ways, and it is released. So when I'm introducing a lot of these words that they need for their writing, then they'll go up onto this wall. Do I put all these words up at once? No. On the Vowel Valley, do I put it all up at once? No. I put it up as I teach it. That's why I did the first one where I just inserted the words as we went. Okay. So what I wanted to show you are some of the how I would do alternate spellings and how I would reinforce those with kids. And then I'm also going to show you a little bit about how I would do consonants, because I think this is super important. If I were teaching my Vowel Valley, I would go like this, right? And I would teach my Vowel Valley, and I would have my E up here. That's the E sound. That's the first one that I taught. My keyword was cheese. Then I'd go down and I would have let's say I've got those. Then as I progress through, I will have gone through and taught all the vowels in the Vowel Valley. But now, as I go along over here, this is where I teach bridge E, and we cross a bridge, and I would teach bridge E here. So if I had a word like late, then I would have to spell the A sound, but I haven't learned how to spell the A sound yet. So the only way I'm learning here is that I'm going to have my bridge E. That E jumps over and makes the A say its name. And so that's where we learn this in the Valley after we, you know, go through our awe. There's a whole story I have that goes along with this that I'm not going to bore you all with, but we cross over the bridge, and this is where we're learning about that bridge E. Now I use bridge E, I don't use magic E or sneaky E, but it's because you're going to come across words where, like the word bridge, where the E doesn't get to go over because there's a blocker there. And the reason the E is there is because the G wants to say J. So I tell the kids the reasons. So the whole point of this is to tell kids why. So this is where you hear the sound. This is how you spell that sound. Then we start getting into the, you know, to the other, you know, options for these sounds. Because if I have the, you know, E sound, then I'm going to eventually, in my curriculum, the way I do it, and I'm not saying everyone has to do it the way I do it, but I feel like if anybody who doesn't know about this, it's really like, hey, what else do you have to do tonight, right? Just kidding. Whatever you learn can't hurt you, right? It's always good to learn something new. I've taken lots of trainings where the one thing I learned was I don't want to do that, but hey, I learned about it first before I made my decision. So if we have E, the next thing that I'm going to teach here was that E, consonant E, that's the next option I have for that, right? Then if I have E, consonant E, later I'm going to learn about when you hear E at the end of a word, since that, you know, bridge E down here is not, doesn't say anything. What happens when we have happy and we have silly, right? And family, then if I hear it at the end of a word, then it would be a Y, right? Then I continue on, and I'm not going like this in this order, right? I'm going down because the next thing I'd be teaching would have been the second spelling for I, and that is also Y, right? Because the majority of the time, if you hear it is going to be an I. It is like hands down your number one choice. So if you hear it, go with an I. That's your best bet. Now, if the word is of Greek origin, right, and you have mythology, then you might be using a Y. But by the time you're at that point, you've learned a little more through the continuum, you would know that that is an option, because the letter Y can make multiple sounds. So we're not doing it by the letter, we're doing it by the sound, okay? So if I hear E, these are the options I've got so far, right? Then eventually, as I go down, you know, we don't have as many options going on for these down here. When I get to you know, if I'm going to be teaching the other sounds, then those are very rare, right? But they're not rare in certain positions. So if I'm talking about if I hear the sound at the end of a word, words in English aren't allowed to end in U. Okay, this is one of the clock face rules. So like those multisensory spelling rules that I was telling you about that we're having that training on. So I go over all these rules in that webinar. Well, 3 webinars and then the clicks. So if I hear at the end of a word and we're not allowed to end words in U, then I have agenda, right? Panda, umbrella. Then I use an A. And that would end up being my alternate spelling here would be that A, because, but every time I do this, I say when and where and how that spelling is going to be used, so that the kids will know that, oh, if I hear in the middle, it's probably this, right? And then we've got schwa. But if I hear it at the end, China, America, umbrella, iguana, it's going to be an A. So then I know that I've got my alternate, and it depends on where it is in a word. Okay, and that is the biggest thing. When you have that sound, those sound cards or just a word wall, you're not giving kids any tools to help them figure out these things that why people think English is weird. It's not weird. What's weird is that we don't teach people the reasons for things. If we taught them the reasons, then they would have a better understanding and nobody would think English was weird. Okay, so as we're going through this, you're going to see that, you know, from the and even these are your most frequent spellings of those sounds, right? And we've addressed those, all of those. But then over time, as we continue through, we'll start adding other ones onto this. So we're going to have our E as an open syllable, right? We're going to have, you know, just like me or veto, that open syllable there. Then we would have, you know, EA, then we're going to have, you know, IE and EI, as in, you know, either and neither. But those are moving through a progression, but we're not doing it all at once. And that's what's so important, is that you teach these slowly over time. That's why when I said my name is Jennifer, but, you know, I was also JJ, and I was, you know, also Jen, and also Miss Hasser, you know, if you had known me for a long period of time, it would be very easy for you to remember all of those labels. But when I try to cram them into a very short period of time and give you these like weird restrictions along the way, then you would get overwhelmed. So it's all about like slowly getting there and not overwhelming kids with all that knowledge. We seem to be able to do it in every other subject, but sometimes in reading, we feel like we need to pile everything on them. And we don't. We want to give them time to apply what they've learned, to really understand it, for it to generalize. I cannot tell you how many kids I tutor that they probably could work for me. They know so many spelling rules, but they don't know how to apply them. They can tell you them, and then you look at their writing and you're like, where's the application? Where's the generalization? And there's none. They can't do it. So we want to make sure that these get solid as we move through and they can apply them. So then that way we put the other things on top of that. Okay. So as we're moving through these, I have 2 Vowel Valleys. I have one that is the one I showed you with the kindergarten one. And then I have one that looks like this, but much, much nicer. And it has the alternate spellings on it. And the way that I do it is I put the E card up, and then after I teach the next spelling for E, I put it up and I put it up, and that's a sound wall. So a kid would say, oh, wait, I want to spell a word, and the word is creepy. Okay, so if I want to spell creepy, I'm going to go to, like, it's got 2 E sounds in it. Which ones do I use? I could go up here and I could say, oh, I go E, and then I know that Y sounds like E at the end, and I hear it at the end. So it's probably that. And, you know, if they were taught by me, then they would know that these are most likely going to be in 1-syllable Anglo-Saxon words. Like, you know, so they start to know the reasons for things, and they can move through everything. And add those layers of reasonings behind it. It's just like little kids, like, you know, when someone calls someone else mom and they go, no, my mom is mom, because the labels are so confusing for them that they're like, no. And like my sister, I grew up in Florida, and my dad would say Miami, and my sister would say, are we going to your Miami? Right? Because those labels, if kids don't understand them, then they're super confusing. But over time, slowly, they will pick up on them, as long as you don't overwhelm them with too much and then expect them to be able to know it. Okay, so this is just my little valley. Okay, so then if we talked about some of the consonants, okay, I'm gonna look at some of these. Could you show us how your mouth slides to make those last few sounds? Okay. So if we have ow, it's ow and oi, ow, oi. And those are your diphthongs, right? Because they're basically like a sound and a half, but they're considered one sound. Okay, so why are only some patterns on the board? For instance, I like this question. Okay, so people will say you have OW saying ow, but you don't have OW saying O. That is because, let me just draw my Vowel Valley really quickly. If I have ow over here, this is a sound wall, okay? It's not a spelling wall, it's a sound wall. So if this is ow, I would have my OU at beginning or middle of words like ouch, right, or couch, and OW at the end, because the sound here is ow. Now, in the Valley, the sound O is here, and that's O like toe, like I stub my toe. So guess where OW would go when it says O? It would go here. Okay? Do you see how it's a sound wall? So if you want to spell snow and I got to figure out how to spell it, I would go here, but I'm still probably going to have to memorize that one. Okay? So that's why you got to be careful that you're not looking at letter combinations, you're thinking about sound, okay? And as you're thinking about the sound, you're telling them where they go, okay? Now someone's asking me where I put my R-controlled vowels. There, after we get out of the Valley, we go and meet a tiger, and that's our growling R tiger, and that's where we learn those. So there's a whole journey here. We start at a party and we're having a great time, and then some people crash our party, and then we go on the Vowel Valley, and then there's the whole story. So how often is E consonant E used? So somebody asked me about that. Is that common? Only if your name is Pete or these, but it is very common as a suffix, right? Like complete. Okay? So you'll see it in different places that way. But no, when we're talking about Bridge E, I'm going to teach it because I'm teaching, I might as well teach E consonant E too. If I'm going to teach I, A, O, U, whatever. So yeah, does my wall look different at different grade levels? Yes. There's a lower level and an upper level, and the upper level is the one with the alternate spellings. That one that I showed you was kindergarten. But on my website, you can see pictures of both of them. We sell them, and you know, obviously you can make your own. You could draw it like this. I draw it all the time. The best thing to look, I mean, honestly, I would read speech to print. People are asking about what to read first. If you want your first reading about this kind of stuff, I would read that by Louisa Moats. Is the only way to see your full Vowel Valley and access your stories to purchase my full curriculum? No, I sell almost everything individually except my manual and a couple other things. So and there's a lot of people asking about consonants. So when I talk about consonants, I talk about voiced and unvoiced consonants. So a voiced and unvoiced consonant, I call them quiet, loud. There's like p, b, right? Same mouth position, p, b, right? One's quiet, one's loud, p, b, right? Your voice box vibrates. It'd be the same for like t, d, t, d, t, d. You can hear that t is quiet, d is loud. They're made with the same exact mouth position. So when that happens, this is why I do it this way. Because if you can learn 2 spellings with 1 mouth position, then that's great. Because I'll tell the kids, tap your tongue behind your teeth, t, 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 right? They can say, t. Do you know any words with t in it? And I'll, you know, tell them if they have words with t in it. And it doesn't matter how it's spelled. If they say pterodactyl, it still sounds like t, so it's not a problem. But then I can also use this as my jumping off point later when I start talking about other spelling rules, because these voiced and unvoiced sounds are the basis of most of our spelling rules. Because if you have t, and if I hear a word that ends in a p, which is a quiet sound, and it's past tense, and I say, okay, slapped, right? The word slapped. It sounds like t. If it's blabbed, like someone blabbed a secret, right? That would sound like d, because it's ease of speech. It's one sound away in your mouth. And now you're teaching them how to, originally, you know, kids would spell these words with a D at the end if they don't know about past tense. They would spell it with a T at the end. If they, remember I said about licked an ice cream cone. But now I can say, if you hear t and d, and it's a past tense verb, then that's when you're going to start being able to start showing them that suffixes are aligned with this, right? So these, you'll say, if you hear this sound and it's a past tense verb, it is spelled ed, because ed after a quiet sound sounds like t, and after a loud sound sounds like d. But if you have a T or a D, like delight, and then you want to say, I'm delighted to meet you, it has to have its own syllable, because you have to be able to hear it. Do you see how most of our rules go back to how you hear things? Because we have another pair over here, like s and z, right? S, z, s, z. One's quiet, one is loud. And then that pair is the same thing. You have to add an ES after those. If they're like, if I have 1 pass, but I have 2 passes, I would have to put an ES so I could hear it, right? It's ease of speech, and it's for auditory discrimination. So do I go into all these advanced things with kindergartners? No. But do I go back to all of that with all of my other kids? Absolutely, absolutely. And so that they can go and start to notice the difference between, you know, a sound and a spelling. And then the spelling is usually linked to a meaning and what that has to do with, right? So let's see. What is my opinion on silent E? I have a very strong opinion on silent E. So my opinion on silent E is, if you have, I think that's mean to call it silent E, because if you have E right there, it's a bridge E. right? And I kind of want to call it what it's doing. But what if I have, you know, this word, the E is not silent, right? It's there so that that C sounds like an S, but we don't want to use an S because it would be prins, which is more than one prin instead of a prince, right? If you have a purse, that E is there because you don't want it to be purrs, right? If we had plea and then please, it's more than one plea, and then that E lets us know that it's not plural, okay? If you get up to Greek, you're gonna have epitome. Now it's an open syllable, right? There are lots of reasons why E is at the end of words, you know, and it's like here, if we had page, it's a bridge E, and it's a signal letter that G is going to say J. So there's two rules going on there. And if we just call it silent E or sneaky E or magic E, then we have to make up reasons for all these other things, or we just have to call them exceptions. So I prefer not to set myself up to have to call everything an exception, or to say, you know, it's just lost its magic, or I have to make up some weird story. So that's why I do that. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I know that we are kind of at where I said I would end, but I've got a couple good questions still that I think I should talk about. So because people are like, what about digraphs? And digraphs are just sounds. So you can say, I can't teach digraphs until, you know, they're older because they're harder than a single letter, but they're not harder. Little kids can say, I want a chip, right? They can say chip because CH is one sound and they know how to say it. So you might as well teach them how to spell it, okay? Because I had this little girl, I had my sound cards and I was flipping through my consonant deck, and you know, I just use like these sound cards, and I was flipping through it and it was SH, and she goes, "Suh," and I said, "Shh," and she said, "Suh," and whispered it because I said, "Shh." But I'm like, why can't you just tell her that if she can say chip and ship, that if you hear the sh sound, this is how you spell it. So to me, it doesn't matter whether it's a digraph or trigraph or whatever. If you hear the sound, this is how you spell it. That's it. Sound first. Hear the sound, this is where you spell it. But if I have like chip, and what about TCH? That's why you don't want a sound card. If you have a sound card and you're like, okay, and then you're like, it could also be, but you don't tell them that this is only going to be at the end, and the reason why the T is there, and the T is there for a reason, and all of those other things, then you're just giving them, that is a bad sound wall. A good sound wall is going to be, I teach you the reason behind it, and then I put it up and I clump all your sounds together. Because if I teach the voiced and unvoiced sounds of sh and its pair zh, people will be like, zh isn't a word or isn't a spelling. And it's not. It's a sound, and it's a common sound. It's just not an initial sound. So if you have vision, j is vision. Okay, treasure, measure, all of these, those spellings are going to be kind of strange to put here. But when I start putting my sound wall up for my consonants, I would start having alternate spellings of these. So the sh, it could be spelled T-I, right? It could be spelled S-I, like Russia. You know, Asia could be spelled S-I. Okay? So there are alternate spellings for all of these sounds, but you want to tell them the reason why, because that Z sound and the T-I and the S-I, those are going to be at junctures of a root and a suffix, right? So that action, okay, act is the root, this is the suffix, and this is your juncture, action, okay? That was very poorly written. Sorry. I have better handwriting than that, I swear. Okay, so let me see what else there is. If you don't have a lot of wall space, you can make it as big or as small as you want. You know, I fit my whole valley on this dry erase board, and when I'm reviewing it with kids, I have the kids write out the whole Vowel Valley on their own. So there's no reason why it has to be giant, because it's more about the kids understanding the concept. So that's why that's important to me. But oh, why is the reason the T? The T is there to protect the vowel. So if you have catch, you would need a T to protect that vowel. That's a TCH rule. I'm gonna be talking about that in the spelling webinar. So if you want to attend that, a lot of these spelling rules I'll be talking about. Oh, what kind of writing utensil? I'm using Wonder Sticks on my dry erase board, because I love my dry erase boards, because on that side there's one, and on this side they're, see, it's double-sided. So fun. Okay. I put them, oh, thank you so much. Someone said, thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. I've been waiting for someone to call me that. Okay. When do I incorporate syllable types? I have an hour, so I was just trying to pick a chunk of something that I could condense into an hour that would help people to kind of think about a sound wall in a different way. You know, but putting up different spellings on a sound wall defeats the purpose if you're not explaining to them when and where those go. So if you have a sound wall and all it has is all the different spellings and the kids have no idea when or where to use them, then you really don't have a sound wall. You're just wearing yoga pants and not going to yoga. So it's really about putting them up, having a reason behind it, explaining the reason to the best of your ability, and then putting them up on the wall and explaining the odds, right? Like the E sound at the end of a word is probably the most common, right? But it's going to most likely be a suffix. It's, you know, it's super common at the end of a word, but most kids are going to be starting off with vowel teams, because those vowel teams are monosyllabic words, and there's going to be a lot of those. And with EE and EA, there really is no real way to figure out which one you're going to use. But in the scheme of things, in the 800,000 words, vowel teams are very rare. So you want to expose them to them, you want them to know it, and in the lower grades, they're important. But once you get into multisyllabic words, there are not a lot of vowel teams, because Greek and Latin doesn't have a ton of vowel teams. If you see vowels together, usually they're split, you know, so they're not working as a team. They'll be split into two different syllables. And usually there's a meaning behind all of these things. And so that's what's really important as well. So like, what type of word is this if this is at the end, and what type of meaning is it? And so if you have, you know, that bridgy, you know, syllable type, and it's a single syllable word, then there are consonant blends at the beginning of the word. They probably have a meaning, right? So if you have the word slide, you're going to use a bridge E, but that SL means, you know, kind of to slope downward, to kind of end up in a horizontal position, like sleep and slide and slimy and all of that. So, you know, if you're layering all these things together when you're talking to kids, you're giving them a depth of understanding that is going to make everything you teach as far as reading is concerned easier, because they're going to start thinking, oh, there's a reason for this. Oh, there's a pattern here. I need to look for the pattern on my own. I don't have to memorize everything. And then that takes a huge burden off of their working memory, and it makes them relax about reading. And so I really think you should just never ever tell kids that English is crazy, because I think that takes the power away from them, and that is not a good thing. So let me see. I've got a lot of people asking me to show them the other. Okay, I think you see it now. Does everyone see it? Okay, these are my alternate spellings. The pictures that go along with these cards, they're my keywords, or they're part of the story where I teach the kids how to, you know, how to learn all of this stuff. So, you know, when I told you about like E, then I have bridge E, then I have the Y where it says I teach it in this story, but the Y at the end of a multisyllabic word, then there's EA, and there's my sailboat, and then there's open E, and that's when I teach it in red block, and then my clock face rules, I teach IE and EI. So this is how you're starting to see that kind of progression of of how I teach all of that. Okay, and let's see. Oh, did I do letters training? Yes, I did letters training like 13 years ago, I think. Let's see. Okay, I mean, all my questions are, I think I've gotten most of them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. So if you wouldn't mind following us on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram. I'm trying to get cool and get an Instagram page. So I think I have 60 followers. If you guys would follow me, like, I would be forever grateful. And my daughters would think I was semi-cool. Maybe not, but they'd wonder what I did to get followers. That'd be great. And then, these are our bundles. We have the criminal word wall and the Vowel Valley, and you can check them out in our store, which is KendoreLearning.com. And thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. If you check out our webpage at KendoreLearning.com, you can find a whole list of our other webinars, and hopefully we will see you then. Thanks so much and have a great night.